Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we are joined by the fantastic Omar Benson Miller, currently starring in the CBS series The Unicorn. And I wanted to start by talking about the journey of going into season two. Obviously at the beginning of the first season, a lot of it was finding the tone. What's the specific comedic approach particularly going to be? Especially when you look at the larger ensemble scenes within the show. So how is your process really shifted with the second season in getting scripts and really just knowing a lot of the responses of your character and knowing what that comedic tone is going to be before you even walk onto set to film them?
I think that first of all, thanks for having me. Secondly, I think to answer the question, when you have uh, the kind of history that a lot of the actors on the show have in real life, because there's so many degrees of connection within the show, because I think they said this is the fourth time that Rob and Michaela have played husband and wife. I worked with Rob for 5 years before this show. I worked with Walton on a film before. So that a lot of people knew each other. So to a certain degree, we knew what to expect starting off. Then when we start to get into the beauty of what the collaboration is between players that you haven't played with before and with writers that you haven't worked with before, there's a process to that. Well, second season, all that's pretty much been ironed out. You recognize the journey that the characters have started on, so you have a decent gauge of potentially where you're going, not the particulars, but just who the people are. And for me, making them dynamic, real people is critical. Then from there, when you step on, I know Rob's gonna be funny. I know that Michaela's gonna be funny. I know that Maya Lynn is going to be intense. I know that Walton is going to be passionate and focused. You know what I mean? You don't know what's going to happen, which is great because our show also includes a lot of improv. But we have great scripts, and you come in, and if you come in prepared, it makes it a lot of fun to just play on the day.
Yeah. And even with the fact that it is, a group ensemble comedy piece, it is a single cam at the same time. So particularly when you're shooting a lot of those larger scenes and you are being given the freedom to play around and have that element of improv, how does that impact a lot of the dynamic of how you're finding the rhythms within those moments together?
You know, I think that kind of works itself out because everybody knows somebody that's represented on the show. Everybody knows a Ben type, a Forrest type, a Delia type, a Michelle type. Everybody knows the guy that's too nice, that is the Wade type, which is why he's the unicorn. So when you're watching it from an audience member's perspective, that makes it easier to digest because you have somebody to identify with, including the children on the show. So then from the performance perspective, all I have to do is to be authentic and honest to the material, and it should come off in proper rhythm. And the other thing is working with the majority of the people that we have on the show are very open to rehearsal and changes. And, oh, hey, man, I want to try something this one. Just give me a little extra space in between this line and this line. I want to see if this works and blah blah blah. And it really is a joy. It's, especially in this time, for this past year, dealing with the pandemic and the darkness that's been going on, having work and a work structure that's fun and light to go in and to focus on that and not focus on the doom and gloom of the world has been a really positive thing for me.
And with the character of Ben as a whole, I think one of the really unique things about the exploration of him as a husband and as a parent with a large family is that so often when we see characters like him, it's oh, I wish what if I was single? And especially when their friend is going out dating, imagining what would my life have been? What could my life have been if I wasn't tied down with a family? But that's not Ben at all. He really loves his family. That's something that he wants to do. He's always looking at positivity. He's always looking at the possibilities of the future for himself. He's never looking back. So with that in mind, how does that help you to make a lot of choices when you're filming scenes and just knowing that that's really how he leads in life?
I don't know, but this is the thing. You take he and us in real life, you take the experiences that you've acquired and they're in a bank inside of you, in a memory bank. And you try not to let those form what is the possible potential for what can be. You don't want to cap yourself, but you also have learned these lessons. Otherwise, you'd be a dummy just making the same mistakes all the time. So the idea that you have uh, uh, the openness to move forward, and I think that's a big part of what this show is about. Is it's about hope, and the hope that after a tragedy you can still move forward, and that there can still be joy, there can still be light. And I think that that's what we're really hitting on and narrowing in on. And we're doing that through the eyes of Wade, the unicorn, who's trying to find this journey of completeness, not just of love, but the balancing act of being a father, being a single man, being a best friend, being sometimes a counselor, sometimes being depressed. He goes through so much on this journey, and I just pray we get to tell the story to its completion.
Yeah. And in working with Maya Lynn Robinson, who plays your wife on the show, I really love the dynamic between the two of them and getting to watch it episode to episode. They lead from such a place of respect for each other. They're each other's champions. And, that's always the type of communication that they have with each other. And especially this season, and seeing, he's immediately supportive in her going back to school and pursuing something
Yeah.
that's important to her. How did the two of you really find that dynamic in those early episodes together, and really come up with the fact that that was what this marriage was going to be with the two of them?
It was difficult because we had to learn each other, yet the material led us to that place. And also, uh, her, who she is as a person, and who I am as a person, and what we wanted to represent on screen. And we wanted to represent that Black love and the Black unity, and the possibilities of marriages that have difficult times, but that work overall, because married people have problems, yet the successful marriages are the ones that stay together and work through their problems. And so throughout the thing, we see different strengths and weaknesses throughout the journey of the 2 seasons so far, of each character, which are partners in this marriage, and how their parenting style is, how their personality style is, how they deal with stress, how they problem solve, and most importantly, how they support one another. And like you said, champion one another. And I think that as the season progresses, you'll see a lot more of that. It's a really beautiful, it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And she's done a great job of that, of making sure that she's portrayed the way that the character's portrayed the way that she wants that character to be portrayed. And I think that we have really strong writers, and that are always open to our conversation and input and questions that can help make all of that more smooth and synergistic.
What are some of the conversations and input that you feel that you've had the opportunity to have on your character, with the fact that they are so open with involving you and the rest of the cast in that process?
It's consistent. It's not just a one off, but I would say, for example, there's an episode coming up when we deal with getting aging and having to have procedures like colonoscopies, and there's a whole backstory that you get to find out about my character's father. And I had input on the way that the first draft came out, about about the clarity of what we were trying to say about the connection between Ben and his father. And I gave my 2 cents, and then it came back and they gave their 2 cents, and it was rewritten, and then I added something, then they added something and subtracted something, and then what you see on screen is a product of that collaboration. And it's a consistency to see collaboration makes things better. And when it's just the iron rule, iron fist, I've been on television shows and in movies like that before, when it's just one person who is the end all be all, it's not necessarily the best experience making a project. Sometimes that person is extremely gifted and has a laser focus and the ability to synthesize everything just through their one set of eyes. Artistically, I think that storytelling and filmmaking is a team sport. So for me, I come from a place of wanting to collaborate, hearing what you think about the material, hearing what my scene partner thinks about the material, hearing what the writers think, what the producers think, what the directors think, processing all that, spitting it out with my interpretation, but then being open to finessing and being malleable on what it is that the final outcome will be.
There's
Of
also
which
a
I
lot of
only have so much control, by the way, because I don't edit the show, so they could use one take or a different take, or you know what I mean. So it's still a collaboration well after it gets out of my hands.
Yeah, you never know what's going to come out on the other side of it. So.
Mm-mm.
There's also a lot of really wonderful, quiet moments and nonverbal moments in the way that, you and Maya Lin communicate together on screen, whether it's just a look that they give each other across the room. I'm thinking about in the puzzle episode, there was this really lovely moment between the two of you where they're in the background of the scene and he's just, you just had your hand on her shoulder and were stroking her arm at one point quietly, which
Yeah.
just added a dimension, even though you weren't delivering any dialogue between the two of you. Do you find that at this point in working together that you just naturally find those moments and you know what they are with each other? Or do you consciously think a little bit still about what some of those actions are going to be together?
Well, we play with it. That's the thing. The cool thing is you do multiple takes, you play with it, you see what feels right, what doesn't feel like right, what works, what doesn't work. One thing that Maya Lin talks about all the time is the set being a safe place, and the safe place to be to play, and when you feel safe, you can try different things. You can maybe shoot your partner a look and see that it works or that it doesn't, and all that kind of stuff, which is really cool. And it's great because she's a theatrical actress. She was trained for the theater, and it's cool that she has that adjustability. That's a tool in her tool bag to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to try this one on this one. Hey, after he says this, I'm going to look at you like, hey, that's some bull. And we can coordinate that and see if that works, or try one where we don't. So, all of this comes from when you get to play with people who are talented and who have a level of experience, and more importantly, who are open once again to the collaboration, so that you can try stuff and they can try stuff and everybody can feel comfortable, and you don't have to worry about things being uncomfortable on set in a way that makes it uncomfortable in real life.
Yeah. And the writers did such a great job at crafting a lot of details about their backstory of their marriage, how they
Yes.
met, who they were when they met, which was very different to who they are now as parents several years later. But obviously you didn't have all of that information when you first went in and filmed the pilot.
No.
So did you find that there were any details that you and Maya Lin constructed for yourselves about what their backstory was at that point that then had to pivot and change a little bit once you got more information further into the season?
That's a really good question. I think that initially a pilot episode, if you watch pilot episodes for all shows, so much changes between the pilot and the series. In our situation, I think what one of the things that's really big is how inclusive or non-inclusive the our children are in every episode. Because like we changed time slots, so the show came on later, which seemed to lean the writers into making it more adult oriented, as opposed to having more episodes with the kids being involved. That kind of stuff is stuff you have to adjust to. And then with the COVID protocols, we're no longer at the soccer field for, like we were in season one. We don't have a bunch of soccer field or basketball practice or basketball game scenes, which were a lot of fun and in my opinion really, really funny. So much of it has had to do with the process of what's happening in the world, because I think maybe we had 2 days off of the stage. Maybe everything had to happen on stage and on set because of the protocols and COVID and so on and so forth. And that changed a lot of stuff. So you take what you've created as the backstory, and then you adjust, you know. And I think that that's part of the journey and the cool part of what it is that we get to do. So I don't think there's any one thing in particular that we said, okay, this is my backstory. Oh, so it wasn't like that. We're learning as they're writing, and they're learning us and trying to write to our strengths, which is always nice, because then that makes it, if it's something you're good at, it makes it a lot easier to perform.
And with protocols as well, there's definitely a few more scenes these days where the kids are upstairs in the bedroom and they're not
Yes.
necessarily present as well. Do you feel like because of that, you've actually gotten to explore a lot more of a very different side of who Ben is in this season, that's led, because it's led into a lot more scenes that are just the adults in the moment?
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a meatier season. And you'll see that as it progresses. the adult characters all were more the focus of the story. Whereas in the first season, I think you can really anchor the focus of the story was Wade and his girls and his friends supporting him to try to put the pieces of his life back together. This season, we've done a lot more exploration on all of the adult characters and who they really are. Like you learn that Forrest actually, brews his own beer. You learn that Ben has a way of playing the game, he calls it, at work to satisfy his boss. You learn that Michelle is a wizard at problem solving and puzzles and this, that, and the other. All of these kind of details that hopefully continue to unfold and to also allow the writers a bigger universe once the pandemic is over and we get to shoot scenes all over the place once again.
Yeah. And obviously with the idea that it is about this community and this kind of self-created family that they have together, it's not just about who Ben is as a dad, but it's also looking at the relationships, like you were mentioning, with his friends' kids and what that brings out in him,
Yes.
because he's a pseudo parental figure to a bunch of other kids in his life.
Yes,
He
trying to teach
literally
them how
sees
to drive, giving them
Yeah.
information. And this is how it is because it really does take a village. I know this is how it was when I grew up. There was other parental figures, which certainly I wouldn't say certain things in front of, or that I knew I needed to be on my P's and Q's. You know what I mean? So yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
I don't know what the question was in there. I just wanted to agree with what you were saying. Sorry.
No, I
Hoping
love
I
it.
interrupted you.
How do you feel like that has really actually expanded the different spaces that you can explore with Ben in looking at the different sides and aspects that each kid brings out in him, because he has such a different and unique relationship and dynamic with them. They didn't just lump these relationships in as like, yes, they know all of the kids. It's like they're all different ages, they're all different personalities, and they all bring out different things in each of these adults in their lives as well.
Well, I think that it's great because it then centers us back to what the show is about, which is about the family that you choose, which are your friends, and about your actual family, like in Wade's situation with his kids, and what it is that we're trying to portray. And we're trying to portray the hope that things can get better in spite of tragedy and insurmountable loss. I mean, the guy loses his wife, who he expected to spend the rest of his life with, to a disease, and he's stuck there to pick up the pieces. But his chosen family, meaning his friends, are there to help him pick up the pieces. And sometimes that means they need to watch his kids. Sometimes that means he needs to watch their kids. Like there's an episode from season 1 where he takes my son to work with him and puts him to work, and this, that, and the other. It all comes back to the central theme, which is family. And that's such a huge part of the human condition and the human connection, because as we're seeing with the difficulties of the COVID era, part of the reason we can't get a hold of the virus is people aren't meant to be apart from one another, and they don't want to be apart from one another. And you have this innate belief that the people who you care about and who care about you won't hurt you or can't hurt you. And so our show gets to explore that in a safe way with a slice of the escapism, because we don't address the pandemic on the show.
Yeah. And when the show started, it wasn't the immediate aftermath of Wade's wife passing away.
Yeah.
It's several months into that journey.
Yeah,
So
you're
it's not,
picking up about a year on.
yeah. So it's not something where with Ben, we necessarily saw the immediate after effect of what that meant to him and how it impacted him emotionally. But are there ways in which you think about the quiet impact that that's had on him in losing one of his closest friends, his neighbors, someone who, was also a parent figure to his children?
For sure. And yet I think that stuff banks in my mind. And one of the reasons that I was drawn to even being a part of this project is because one of my brothers passed away a couple of years before we started doing this. And that's always in your mind. You always think about the people that you love who have passed on. And ultimately, I think you have that. It's a part of your performance because you're aware of it. But that's not the particular story that we're telling rather. And in that, the story that we're telling is about the point where we pick it up and moving forward. And all of that stuff comes through nuance. There's several situations where we as a friend group without Wade are trying to figure out how do we speak to Wade. Is this the right time to talk about this? Is it too early? Is he still sensitive about this part or that part? Or should I not mention this or should I mention that? All these different approaches that way.
Yeah. And previously in working on the show, you weren't just working on the Unicorn, you were also working on Ballers and then doing voiceover work on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles all at the same
Yes.
time, which is wildly impressive. And
Thank
and
you.
when you're jumping between multiple projects in that way, do you find that you have to kind of have a different style of how you're preparing for each of them and really thinking about the scripts in advance and then compartmentalizing as you jump between projects? Because they also, as projects, all require a really different stylistic approach in the way that you come in and work on them as well.
For me, it actually worked out well because each of those projects were so specific and distinct that it's not like they were close to one another. The world of Ballers that Rob and I inhabited, of glitz and glamour of Miami, and then professional sports in LA and whatnot, has nothing to do with that dynamic that we're dealing with on the Unicorn. So in that, it made it a lot easier. It also made it a lot easier that the overlaps were short, because the time period when we were shooting Ballers versus when we were shooting the Unicorn, there was a gap. So in that, as an artist, you had time, and as a person, you had time to separate, to reset your mind and separate and refocus, go back into the scripts and dig into who they were. The Unicorn came along after we were already 5 years into Ballers. So I had a strong handle on who Charles Green was before I started to figure out who Ben Taylor was. And then with the Ninja Turtles, this is just a blessing on a blessing, because this is, this is everybody's dream to get to portray one of the voices of a cartoon they loved growing up. So that was, that was something that required a different muscle because I'd never done it before. But I am a big old kid at heart. So I had a fantastic cast and incredible voice director, and Rob Paulson, who is who everybody knows from the Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain. I mean, a million shows. He was on the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he was able to teach me. I was able to learn so much just dealing with him. You get so much experience with the job. And it's such a conundrum because you need the job to get the experience. You need to get the job to get the experience. And yet this is life. And I've been blessed enough so that, people have taken a gamble on hiring me for stuff that they may or may not know that I can do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this and such an enjoyable conversation this afternoon, Omar.
Thank you.